Every professional astronaut has a different story of how they were able to take the journey into space. Professor Dunbar will describe hers as a NASA astronaut, but it shares a common foundation with all other career and professional astronauts, a love of learning, reading, science, and mathematics, and hard work. In addition to describing her own pathway, Dr. Dunbar will share unique film footage of her last mission aboard the Space Shuttle and help students to envision the future of space exploration in the 21st century. It is an exciting time, reminiscent of the beginning of Heavier Than Air, flight of the Wright brothers more than 100 years ago. It is the excitement for the future and the need to develop the skills to make it happen that Dr. Dunbar shares with her own students and classes as a professor of aerospace engineering at Texas A&M University. Now everyone, join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Dunbar.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you today. And so I think I'm going to use pictures, they're worth 1,000 words, right? You've heard that phrase, to help share this story. My own pathway, which may not be your pathway, but perhaps there's some words in there of wisdom that can help you along the way, where we are in space and where we hope to go, and that you'll be a part of that. So let's see if I can share my slides. Okay, so I'm just really delighted that you are a school that's dedicated to science and mathematics. That's so important. It's not the only thing for a well-rounded student, but it certainly is an important first step. Let's see if I can make this advance. There we go. So I kind of call my presentation Thinking Outside the Sphere. A little bit of a play of words on thinking outside the box, about enlarging your vision beyond where you are right now to the greater world and to the universe that we're in. My family, like many other families in this country, have a history that comes from other places. That's what this planet's been all about for, at least millions of years of human history, is migration around the world for whatever reason, sometimes for curiosity and exploration, such as the great explorations across the oceans 200 years ago, or simply to survive in the early days, groups of people following animals, then finally domestication of animals and of crops. But we've all been moving around this planet. And my grandparents immigrated from Scotland about 100 years ago, my grandparents. So I knew them very well. It's my grandfather, who lived to the age of 93, who, by the way, never flew in an airplane. And he passed away just before I flew in space. But he watched a tremendous amount of history. He was a young man when the Wright brothers flew. He saw us go to the moon. In his own farming operation, as you see here in Oregon, he actually started with a buckboard and mules to move his wheat to the river for transportation. This is in Condon, Oregon. My grandmother grew up in a small town in northern Scotland. She immigrated separately, and they met in Portland, Oregon. And she worked as growing up as a nurse's aide and a maid. And that house at the very top is their first house where my father grew up. Grew up going to a one-room schoolhouse. They didn't have indoor running water, indoor plumbing, but he got an excellent high school education. In fact, out of that school system came a Nobel Prize recipient, Linus Pauling. So it isn't always the fancy stuff around you that's important. It's, are you willing to learn? Our science and our engineering that we teach now wasn't invented yesterday. Some of it is, but the foundations, what you're learning in class, physics and chemistry, geometry, mathematics, goes back 100 years or more, 200, 300, 1,000 in some cases. And we build upon those foundations of understanding the world around us to be able to move forward, to give us the communication systems that we have, to the navigation, to buy food in a grocery store, for example, and the energy. All of that takes science and engineering in an important context. So we had a saying at NASA that It wasn't your circumstance that was important. It was your attitude. Your attitude determines your altitude. In our case, we had a strong sense of education. My particular grandparents and parents didn't have an opportunity to go to a university. I did. I studied hard and helped to make that happen. So I grew up myself on a homestead, and you know what that is in Oklahoma, in Washington State. After World War II, my father met my mother, and they homesteaded in the Yakima Valley. Their first year together, they were living in a tent, which was, you had to build a structure. They didn't even have irrigation at that time. But my dad's dream was to grow and raise cattle, Hereford cattle. So he established with my mother the Diamond Double Bar Ranch. To the west, we could see Mount Adams and Mount Rainier. So I grew up in Washington State in a rural area that's rural like many parts of Oklahoma. And in fact, this is the nearest post office, mountains to the west. But walking out our front door, this is what it looked like, the Rattlesnake Hills and the alfalfa fields across the road. Not many neighbors. So I grew up oldest of 4 kids. And because you couldn't walk to the mall, or there weren't a lot of things to do when you were through with your chores, I read. I checked books out of the traveling bookmobile and read all the time. And that's how I really saw a lot of the world. But I was a kid, just like you, started out just like you. So you're born, and what makes a difference on our paths? And it's the people around us. Your teachers are very important, your parents, but also the outside influences, and a lot to do with you. Now, my father was a bit adventuresome. This was his first prize Hereford bull, and he taught me how to take calculated risks. This is not a big risk. He has me on top of Bolivar, his favorite bull, but he's holding me there. And it was a bit fun. My mother took a picture. Look, Ma, no hands. I still sometimes encounter teachers that are kind of horrified at this picture. And I kind of remind them that, we take a lot of risks when we're out, calculated risks, when we're hiking, we're farming, we're ranching, and it actually makes us better adults because you know how to manage that risk and what it means. So growing up on the Diamond Double Bar Ranch with 2 younger brothers and a much younger sister was quite a bit of fun. We used horses not for recreation. They were actually part of our farm implements. We used them to round up cattle every year and bring them down from the mountains so they could winter over at the ranch. My brothers and I were in 4-H. Bobby and I raised steers. I also had a horse, and that was a lot of fun. Did that for 9 years. So what sort of influenced me about space? Well, being born at kind of the right time helped. You're at a lucky time. We've been in space had people in orbit your whole lives. But when I was born, no one had gone to space. But I was really interested in science and mathematics because I was surrounded by it. If you do come from a farmer ranch, you know that your parents are running a business. And you don't have income every month or every week. You sell things and you bring in income. You have to manage how that money is spent all year long. You have to buy clothing and food and fuel for the tractor. And then when I was 9, we actually bought a TV, a black and white TV. And my favorite show was a black and white program called Mr. Wizard. And every Saturday morning, Don Herbert was his name, would bring in a young boy and a girl, and he would display the concepts of physics and chemistry and mathematics. And you can still find his programs on YouTube because physics and chemistry still has those foundational laws. It was a very small elementary school. There was 22 in my class for 8 grades before I graduated from the 8th grade, and then had to go to a nearby high school about 13 miles away. So I went from Outlook Grade School to Sunnyside High School. But I read books like Flash Gordon and watched a TV program on Flash Gordon, read Jules Verne, From the Earth to the Moon. And then when I was 8 years old, our first artificial satellite was launched by the Soviet Union. It was called Sputnik. And that really was a revolutionary time in space. It was a little bit of a frightening time because we had another country flying objects over our nation that we couldn't control. It was right after World War II. But it was also an exciting time because we had the technology and the engineering to start to put people into space. So we selected our first 7 astronauts, and Alan Shepard flew suborbital, and I'm sure you're studying that in class, not quite around the one orbit around the Earth. That was called Mercury 7. And then John Glenn was our first astronaut to actually circle around the Earth, and he did that in 1962 in 3 orbits. And based on that, just the success of that mission, our nation decided to go to the moon, or felt that it had the engineering information to go to the moon. So I was only about 13 years old when our president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, made a very important speech here from Texas, Rice University, in which he challenged the nation to go to the moon. And you can also find this speech on YouTube. I think it's one of the best speeches that I, quite frankly, never heard. He said, "This generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. This country was conquered by those who move forward, and so will space. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. The growth of our science and education will be enriched by new knowledge of our universe and environment." Well, that was exciting. Suddenly, all this science fiction that I had been reading had the opportunity to be science fact. And the fact that it was hard was actually exciting too. My brothers and I would always challenge it gave us a great sense of accomplishment when we succeeded. So I graduated from the 8th grade and getting ready to go into the 9th grade in Sunnyside, the nearest town. And my 8th grade teacher, who had been my 6th grade teacher and also the principal, Mr. Miller, asked me what I wanted to become when I grew up. And I said, I want to build spaceships and I want to fly in them. And he said, "Well, you'll have to take algebra." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Trust me." And I did. So in the 9th grade, I enrolled in algebra. And then I took geometry, I took trigonometry, math analysis, biology, chemistry, and physics. But I didn't forget the sports. I was on some teams. Baseball was my passion. I was also a cheerleader and joined the debate and speech teams. And finally, I graduated. I had a good GPA. I did very well in science and math. And I was accepted into the University of Washington in Seattle. I didn't have enough money to go to college, though. My parents couldn't afford it. But I qualified for something called the National Defense Education Act loan and grant. I had to pay it back, but it would support me for 4 years. But I didn't know what to major in. So I went to my physics teacher, Mr. Anderson, and he looked at the list of majors at the university. He says, "I think you should become an engineer." And once again, I said to him, "Well, I'm not sure I know what that is." He said, "Trust me." So I checked that block, and it was one of the best decisions that I ever made. I eventually went into the Department of Mining, Metallurgical, and Ceramic Engineering, which is materials engineering, under Doc Muller, we called him. I told him what I wanted to do. He never said I was crazy. None of these teachers said I was crazy, even though there hadn't been female astronauts at that time. You know, this was opening up a whole new world, especially with something called the Space Shuttle. And he had research contracts from NASA to work on the shuttle. And he said, "I'll introduce you to NASA engineers." And so Doc Muller became a very good supporter for the entire time he lived, and he passed away just after my first flight. He was at that launch. He also became quite famous for his work on the space shuttle. Here he's receiving a NASA medal from our senator at that time, Scoop Jackson. Well, I'm in college in the University of Washington studying engineering, and in July 1969, in the summer, July 20th, my friends and I watched as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. It was an exciting time. We went back to the moon to walk on it, you know, a total of 6 times. We orbited a couple times. We built a space station called Skylab. These were exciting times. In the course of exploring the moon, we pushed our science and engineering forward. A lot of people don't realize that we wouldn't even have Earth observing satellites right now if we hadn't gone to the moon. We didn't have communication satellites when we went to the moon. We designed those later so that we could put people into low Earth orbit and also to relay signals to other places. Navigation, GPS didn't exist. This came out of research and development. We all take that for granted now. Weather satellites didn't exist. There were no satellites in Earth orbit when we went to the moon. Those evolved out of our mission to go to space. And it has allowed us to really study our Earth. And we have a lot of attention these days on our Earth. Astronauts study geology, oceanography, meteorology, and we've been using satellites for decades to monitor and to study the Earth. Well, when I went into that department of mining, metallurgical, and ceramic engineering with Doc Muller, this is the picture he showed me. This was a long time ago, 1968, and that was exciting to me. This was really the first spaceship that would launch like a rocket and land like an airplane and take up to 8 people. So only about 8 minutes to get to orbit. You could stay in orbit for about 14 days and then land like an airplane. And it was reusable. We think that that reusable rockets are new right now, but in fact, the shuttle started to be reusable. The first day it was launched in 1981. The first launch actually was April 12th. So why it's reusable is because of the materials that are on the exterior of the shuttle that are able to withstand the heat caused by reentry. You can study that in class. It's friction. If you're orbiting the Earth per Kepler's laws once every 90 minutes at an altitude of about 150 to 200 miles, you're traveling 17,500 miles per hour, about 25 times the speed of sound. We call that Mach 25. When you come back into the Earth's atmosphere, you slow down, you're actually traveling very fast through the atmosphere. When you hit the air molecules, that creates a lot of friction and a lot of heat. So you might see up to 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit on the bottom of the shuttle and up to 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit on the nose. It still remains a challenge for any vehicle that wants to come back from Earth orbit and then relaunch with the same exterior. So I was hired by Rockwell, the company that built the space shuttle, to work on the thermal protection system. So in effect, that first goal that I shared with Mr. Miller to build spaceships was being accomplished. And it was an exciting time working on Space Shuttle Columbia out at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Long story short, I then applied for the Astronaut Corps, was selected for the 1980 class, and this is my class, and then had the opportunity to fly on the shuttle 5 times out of its 135 flights. So it flew for 30 years. You can still see it on TV, it's reruns. It was a major milestone. It was critical for us to build the International Space Station, to launch the Hubble Space Telescope, and to replace instruments on it. And we flew more than 400 astronauts from 23 nations on it. It was an essential bridge to what we have now in low Earth orbit. We built 5 shuttles. We flew experiments from K through 12 students, through university, through faculty and companies. It was an essential platform to move forward in space. Now I'm going to show you just a short film here of launch. I don't know if you're getting sound or not. This is just the first 2 minutes. And I encourage you to visit the NASA sites or YouTube to see an entire launch profile. But we used, for the first time, we used computers to simulate what this launch would look like. And we have the crew inside the flight deck. This camera's on the outside. It was dawn in Florida. And the first 2 minutes, we're only using we're using the solid rocket boosters and 3 main engines. Those 2 solid rocket boosters fall off, and then for 6 more minutes, we use the 3 main engines to get to orbit. You can see those 3 main engines there, 2 solid rocket boosters. So you'll only see this through the what we call SRB SEP, solid rocket booster separation. And this is all real footage. This is not animation that's generated on a computer. And the engineers who did this and made it didn't have the advantage of all of those animation capabilities. So it was kind of an exciting time. The shuttle also was not designed like a small capsule. It was designed like an airplane. It had a flight deck and a mid deck. We had a galley on the bottom and a waste management system or toilet and sleeping compartments. And the top cockpit, where we launched 4 people, was really the command and the control of the vehicle. What made the shuttle so useful, though, was this 60-foot payload bay, 60 feet long, 15 feet in diameter. And every flight over those 135 flights was different in the cargo bay, as you'll see as I quickly go through some of my flight configurations. That's why we were able to build the International Space Station that's still up there right now. So my first flight in 1985 was 8 people, 5 Americans, 2 German astronauts, and a Dutch astronaut. And we trained for about 18 months. I trained for 7 of those in West Germany. We had many European and German experiments on board, and also trained as a spacewalker, an EVA crew member as well. In 1990, I also was an EVA crew member, but I also operated the robotic arm, and we retrieved a research satellite that had been in Earth orbit for 5 years. And exposed to the space environment, we tested many materials that we built the station out of and future satellites, because we don't always get everything back. And the space environment's pretty severe. There's micrometeoroids, there's ultraviolet light, there's radiation. And it's important that we be in the environment to collect that data so we can build new vehicles. In 1992, I flew on a 13-day space laboratory flight that was actually inside the payload bay of the shuttle. We worked with experiments and furnaces and instruments that then were developed to go on to the International Space Station. This was a very critical step to evolving to where we are right now. And in 1995, I was requested to train in Russia with the first crew that would dock between a Russian Soyuz vehicle and the space shuttle. So I trained as a backup with my cosmonaut crew to actually launch on the Soyuz. The prime crew member did launch in March of 1995, and so then I became part of the crew on the space shuttle that docked. So the first docking between the space shuttle and the Russian space station Mir occurred in June of 1995, and that was the first time we had 10 people together on orbit. It was an exciting time. This is the Mir space station. It's no longer in Earth orbit. It was a collaborative effort. We called it the Pathfinder to build the current International Space Station, which has the Russians as a partner as well. We also launched the docking adapter. That's this yellow capsule here that allowed the shuttle to dock to the Mir space station. Here you can see a picture of us docked. This is not an artist concept. This was taken by the Soyuz when it undocked. This picture, and it's actually in my background, was taken on that flight. I think all the crews had a chance to take it from the Mir space station over the nose of the space shuttle. We conducted medical experiments, many of those that are continuing on the space station now, as we learn how to protect astronauts who stay in space for a long period of time and prepare to go back to the moon, to a moon base, and then on to Mars in a couple of decades. We also established a very collegial environment. We're a crew. It didn't matter what nationality we were from. We had one of the cosmonauts had a guitar up there. I couldn't sing very well, but we all made an attempt to sing along. And then my last flight was the 8th of 9 docking flights to the Mir. We were getting to the end of this, what we called phase 1 program, and we were starting to fly more Americans to the Mir and flying more Russian cosmonauts on the space shuttle. So in this flight, we actually had a Russian cosmonaut, Salajan Sharapov, here. And in my process of training in Russia, I was there about 13 months, I also had to learn Russian, and he had to learn English, and so that we could communicate in both languages. And again, we had, after docking, 10 people on board. This is how you take a picture. Well, you finish your mission and then you land. The shuttle, again, is very much like a cockpit of an airplane, lots of switches, computer displays. We have to wear a pressure suit and during reentry in case we might have a problem. But I have a little bit more modern artist concept of reentry and the heat of reentry. But the shuttle is a glider when it finally lands. Very precise, targeted landing based on the navigation systems that were developed for it. And we landed at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was a very successful mission, the end of January 1998. Well, the shuttle was responsible for helping to build the International Space Station. I'm sure in your classes that you're studying it or looking at the various disciplines that are studied, biology, botany, fluid physics, combustion, material science. What makes it a unique laboratory, why you can't do this on the Earth, is because it is microgravity. It's a millionth of the gravity we have here, our free fall. So systems behave differently. It adds to our scientific base. You can learn a lot more about it by visiting the website, and even when it's coming over your hometown in Oklahoma. You can see it. It's as bright as Venus. And if you haven't seen it, my 94-year-old mother can go to the website and figure this out. I challenge you to look for it when it's coming over Oklahoma. But it is the largest kind of international civil engineering structure we've ever built, orbiting the Earth once every 90 minutes, again at 17,500 miles per hour. We've had 400 astronauts from 23 nations, and we have 5 major partners: NASA, European Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, the Japanese Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. I was very proud to have been part of this program. So when it was retired in 2011, after 30 years, I was a bit sad, but still very proud to have been an engineer helping to build and operate this program. Well, what's next? Well, the moon and Mars. And the moon's kind of exciting right now. We're looking towards building a lunar base. This program is called Artemis Mission to the Moon. We're hoping to be there by 2024. It might be 2025. It's called Artemis because that's the sister to Apollo. Apollo was our mission in the 60s. It's also intended to include the first woman to the surface of the moon as well. So this is just one concept of a lander. You might have been reading in the news. There's several concepts out there, including one by SpaceX. But this will return us to the moon so that we can potentially stay. We're also putting into orbit a new space station around the moon that's called Cislunar, and it's called Gateway. So the concept of operations in the future might be that once the Orion vehicle docks with the Gateway, that you would go back and forth to the surface of the moon from the Gateway rather than just directly to the surface. But eventually, we're working our way to the surface of Mars, which we've been studying with robotic landers and rovers now for decades. That might happen in 2035. That's the next available window where it's feasible, and it can happen, but it'll happen with you. It takes a large team of people to make this happen. And it's not just scientists and engineers. It's medical personnel. There'll be medical people on the crew. It's managers. It's the skilled technicians that built the hardware. It's very much a team effort to make this happen. The class of 2017 was the last class selected. 2 of these people will be on the moon, we hope in 2024 or 2025. And I'd just like to leave you with a few words here, a hope of wisdom. If you go back 5,000 years and you look at the technology and this mathematics, the foundations of mathematics and physics and chemistry, the great structures that were built, the philosophy of science, it's important to remember that our health and prosperity depends on science and mathematics and engineering. The quality of life around us, the fact that our buildings stand around us, that we have water and heat and food, and you probably all have access to a computer and probably a smartphone, and you depend on GPS and you look for the weather on the internet. So our nation's health and prosperity really depends on our innovation and our solutions to the problems of supporting life and inspiration of you and you inspiring others. We need scientists, mathematicians, engineers, chemists, and physicists, and we need leaders. I'm going to close just finally with a quote from Dr. Robert Goddard. So Robert Goddard designed the first liquid-fueled rocket back at the turn of the last century. He was actually born the same year as my grandfather, and as a young boy in high school, your age, he climbed to the top of a tree and thought, what would it take to get higher? What would it take to get to Mars? And that's what inspired him to start studying physics. And then in the 1920s, he gave a public lecture in New York where he talked about liquid propulsion and the ability to go to Mars. And he was ostracized in the New York Times. The New York Times said even the simplest high school student, such as you, knows that that's impossible. That did not deter him. And it shouldn't deter you from following your dreams either. He continued his research, eventually going to New Mexico to launch his rockets. Unfortunately, he died just after World War II, but it was his wife who made sure that his patents were protected. And on the day that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Collins launched to the moon, the New York Times published a public apology to Robert Goddard. It's interesting to note that he was the valedictorian for his class. And in his class remarks, he said, it's difficult to say what's impossible. For the dreams of yesterday become the hopes of today and the realities of tomorrow. So I hope that all your hopes become realities and you have the capability within yourselves to make it all happen. So thank you very much, and I welcome your questions. And I'm not quite sure how to get the screen back to you. Looks like this might do it. Okay. Okay, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
I have a question.
I can't quite hear anyone.
That's okay. I'll have Adrian repeat it. So do you think you'll ever get to go back on any more space missions?
He asked if you think you'll ever get to go back on any space missions.
Well, I'm retired from NASA, and I am a professor of aerospace engineering, but I would go back in a heartbeat. I don't think age is the limit anymore, but you'd have to stay healthy. I was very fortunate growing up that, being athletic and living on a farm and a ranch, we ate pretty healthy. So I was able to pass all the medicals, and that's still an important part to going to space. But I certainly hope I might have that opportunity, even if I have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Alexander, thank you. Besides the language barriers, what were the major issues of working with other cultures in a space environment?
Alex asked, besides the language barrier, what was the question?
What were the major issues of working with other cultures?
Oh, what were the major issues working with other cultures?
Well, the language, I've had the opportunity when I was in college to take my first trip overseas. There's lots of languages in the world. There's lots of languages here in the United States. I think it's important to expand your language capability. I took Latin in high school, which gave me a foundation for a lot of Western languages, but Russian was different. it's just something you had to do. You know, we had to learn both languages, and so you studied and did that. There are differences in culture, and you just learn. You're open-minded to each other. When I was growing up and knowing that my parents and my grandparents had all immigrated from different places, there's an old saying that says, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." I don't know if you've heard that one. That means, you know, don't get so stuck on your own way that you're not open to listening to other people.
What is the best route of education if someone wants to become an astronaut?
What's the best route of education if someone wants to become an astronaut?
Well, there's several routes. The criteria for selection is engineering, science, or medicine, physician. And I've always encouraged students to go to the NASA website where all of the bios, I think, are still located, but now you can find them on Wikipedia. And just see the variety of pathways. You know, it's important to get a college education. It's you're not selected right out of college. You have to have some professional experience. You have to demonstrate that you know how to work as a team. You know, get some leadership opportunities, be a good citizen, stay healthy. And so I just encourage you to look at what seems to resonate with you, what excites you, and make sure you just have the qualifications along the way.
On.
John from Oklahoma City. What are you looking forward to the most in the future of aerospace?
What are you looking forward to most in the future of aerospace?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to our return to the moon. I have a laboratory here where my graduate students and even some undergraduates are working advanced spacesuits, studying how liquids behave in a weightless environment and maybe in the 1/6 gravity of the moon, because we don't know how that works. And that's really important for heat and mass transfer. Some of you studying physics may have already been introduced to that topic. So I'm looking forward to just getting back on the moon, to having a permanent laboratory there, very much like we have in Antarctica. And then I hope I'm still around by the time we set first footsteps on Mars. Might be one of you.
Enoch.
My name is Enoch from Oklahoma. My question would be, in your career as an astronaut, what challenges did you face the most as an astronaut?
As an astronaut, what problems did you happen to face the most?
Well, I don't know that I can give you a quantitative category of problems, okay? You know, it's like any career. You study hard, you work hard. I think the biggest challenge, I don't call them problems, we want challenges, right? The biggest challenge was that I had studied Latin in high school. I'd studied French as an undergraduate at the university. But learning Russian when I was already in my 40s was a little bit harder. I knew the physics, I knew the experiments, I knew I'd already flown in space. So learning that from the Russian side, their physics is the same here. You know, it just was a little bit harder. I had to work a little harder, practice a little more.
So how do you feel about people like Elon Musk taking space exploration and turning it into a private business?
How do you feel about people like Elon Musk making turning like space exploration into a private business?
Well, I had what I didn't talk about was after I left NASA, I was the president and CEO of the Museum of Flight in Seattle for 5 years. And there we captured the history of aviation and space. So it's important to remember that aviation started this same way. The airmail, the planes and the pilots who flew airmail was owned by the federal government. And it was only through that sharing where the government invested in the technology and the mail and commercial aviation became commercial that we grew an industry that you can buy an airplane ticket from. So we're quite excited about the fact that we will, that NASA will continue to represent the nation in the high risk science and engineering to explore, but that we can buy services from the commercial industry, and they can sell seats to you. So that's how we grow this vision of the future. It's a partnership. It's not an either or, because we're all investing in it. So if Elon is successful, that's great. If Blue Origin is successful, that's great. Virgin Galactic is successful, that's great. There are 3 new companies that are going to build space stations in orbit. And you might be able someday to buy a ticket on a commercial space vehicle to a commercial space station for a vacation. So this century is going to be an exciting century.
Jane. She has, as someone who has been to space, what does it look like?
I'm sorry, say that again.
As someone who's been to space, what does it look like?
Oh, well, part of it's behind me, and depends. Are you looking at the Earth, or are you looking back out at the stars? If you've studied Carl Sagan, where he said there are billions and billions of stars, there are. You see so many more stars above the Earth's atmosphere that it's hard to pick out the constellations, you know, such as the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper. We're just a small piece of this great universe. And as we start to learn more about the universe, we're learning more about ourselves, about our solar system, what's happening on Venus, what's happening on Mars, what's happening with our sun, what's happening with other suns, which are stars. So moving forward, as we move out, we'll learn more about ourselves. I encourage you to go to NASA's internet site to look at some great pictures.
My name is Ibrahim from Norman, Oklahoma. My question is, how competitive is it to become an astronaut?
How competitive is it to become an astronaut?
Well, it's pretty competitive, but you know, I'm reminded of something my grandfather used to say. So my grandfather barely had a high school education out of Scotland. He was in a very poor family, which is why he immigrated at 19 for opportunity and freedom. And he just wouldn't stand for any of us saying, well, you know, that's not possible for me. Because he used to say, a horse never won a race it didn't enter. So it can be hard, but if you don't enter the race, you'll never know, right? So don't let competition deter you. You can be as good as you want to be.
My name is Donald. I'm from Titan. I was just curious what the prerequisites were to be a part of the astronaut program and what kind of training was required when you were 8 parts.
What are the prerequisites to be in the astronaut program, and what things are in the program?
Okay, so a lot of the requirements aren't posted on the NASA website. You have to have at least a bachelor's degree in science, engineering, or medicine, with an advanced degree preferred. You're more competitive if you have a master's or a PhD, if you're on the science side. If you're on a pilot side, they would like you to have gone through test pilot school. But again, having that experience and being in the work environment is important, because NASA will interview and send interview sheets to people you've worked with and worked for, because they want to know about your attitude, your ability to work under pressure, and if you can be a team member, how collaborative you are as well. So keep those things in mind. You know, expose yourself to team environments. Might be a team engineering, might be a sports team. Sports are really a great way to build team mentalities. So the NASA posts these requirements whenever they do a competition for selection.
What was it like experiencing Earth's gravity?
Could you repeat that?
What was it like experiencing Earth's gravity? Getting used to it after.
Like coming back.
Oh wait, what was it like getting used to Earth's gravity when you came back?
Well, I was on pretty short flights, 7 days, longest 13 days, and the system that is impacted the most on a short flight is your vestibular system. because there's no up and down. You've got an organ in your brain called the otolith that tells you what vertical is, and you don't use it for a period of time. So it takes a little time to get used to that, up and down, plus your semicircular canals. Now, for astronauts that have been in space for a year, they also have some atrophy of the muscles, some of the bones. So they have a little longer recovery time. Now, you can learn about all these changes in the human body at a NASA website called the Human Health Program. And it talks about all of the changes in the body and what kinds of studies are being executed even on the station now to help us understand it. This understanding also helps us with Earth-based diseases, for example, osteoporosis, but also how to develop countermeasures as we go to Mars.
More questions? All right, let's thank Dr. Dunbar for speaking.
Thank you very much. Good luck to all of you. Have a great
Dr.
day.
Dunbar, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your day. Next time when you're in Oklahoma, please stop by and visit us.
I would love to do that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.